everyone, this is Heather. Thanks so much for joining me. Today I've got another card tutorial for you using the brand new Opaque Pigment inks from Spectrum Noir. I did another video with them last week, so I wanted to share one more card, and today I'm going to be making this cute bear card with a fun honeycomb background. So be sure to check out my channel from last week for a little bit more of a closer look at these inks. Today I'm going to be using the Lemon Tonic, the Honey Pot, and Jade Black. I've got a yellow cardstock base, just an 8.5 by 11 cut scored folded in half. I have a sheet of Bristol Smooth cardstock, some brown cardstock, and 110-pound white cardstock for stamping and embossing. I'm going to start off by stenciling my background. I'm using this honeycomb stencil from Stencil Revolution, and I'm just going to take a couple pieces of washi tape, and I'm going to tape my paper to my stencil just so it doesn't shift around. I've also brought over a scratched piece of paper so I don't make a mess. I'm starting off with the Lemon Tonic ink and a blending brush. I like to have my paper be a little bit larger than my stencil and then trim it down. I just find, for me personally, it's just a little bit easier to manage. I'm just taking my blending brush and in soft swirling motions, I'm going over the stencil and adding that ink to the Bristol Smooth cardstock. And I want it to be a little bit lighter in some places and a little bit darker in others. That just helps to add some depth. And next, using the Honey Pot ink, I'm going to do the same thing. Again, just have it kind of be a little bit darker in some areas and a little bit lighter in others. And those two colors blend really nicely together and really add some great depth and dimension. At any time, if you want to stop and see how your stenciling's looking, you can always lift that up just to double check that it's looking good. So I think I'm happy with the way this looks. I'm going to peel off my stencil and remove the tape. And all you need to do is just rinse your stencil off underwater. If it's really stained, you could use a little bit of dish soap. Using a stitched rectangle die from Stampin' Up! That measures about 4 1/4 by 3. I'm going to kind of lay it where I think it looks best on my panel, and I'm going to tape that in place and run that through my die cutting machine. I'm also taking another stitched rectangle die that's slightly larger. It's about 4 3/4 by 3 1/2. And on my brown cardstock, I'm also going to run that through my die cut machine. Here are my finished panels, and I'm just going to set these off to the side. Next, I'm going to do some stamping and embossing. And the stamp set that I'm using is Curious Forest Friends from W+9. I'm taking the Wishing You a Fun-Filled Day, and I'm going back to that Honey Pot ink. I'm stamping that on my 110-pound white cardstock, and I've just got clear embossing powder. I'm just going to pour that over and tap off the excess. And with my heat gun on high, I'm going to melt my embossing powder. Using the black ink, I'm stamping out the rest of my images, and I'm going to do the same thing. I'm just going to pour on some clear embossing powder and heat with my heat tool. I'm not sure if you can see it on camera, but I really love that nice, bright, shiny look that black embossing gives, and it also gives you a nice barrier when you're coloring so that you don't go outside the lines. I'm going to be coloring my images with Spectrum Noir alcohol base markers, and I'm starting off by coloring in my entire bear and the honey pot in GB5. With TN4, I'm going to be adding some shading and shadowing on my bear. And I really wanted him to kind of have like a Winnie the Pooh sort of look, and I thought that these colors worked really well for that. I'm also going to add a little bit of shading on the side of, I called it a honey pot earlier, actually it's a bee's hive. And going back in with the GB5, I'm just going to blend those two colors together. Going to do the same on the hive, and I think now he's got a nice little Pooh Bear look to him. Using GB10, I'm going to color in both of my branches except for the leaves. With those colored in, I'm going to move on to TN8, and I'm just going to kind of follow the natural line of the stamp on the wood grain. Just add that extra color. Go back to the GB10 and just blend those two in together. And with CG4, I'm going to add just a little bit of green to those little leaves there. Here's my finished coloring. And I do not have a die cut set for this, so I'm just going to use my scissors and just cut all of these images out, just giving a little bit of a white border. I'm also taking a thin stitched rectangle die. I'm going to bump it up towards the edge of my words, tape that in place, and run that through my die cutting machine. So here are all my images cut out, and I'm just going to take my scissors and trim just a little bit off the end of my words. And I just wanted to point out how nice and bright these inks are when you emboss them on white cardstock. That color really pops on there. I think that's so pretty. Also, my branches are a little bit longer than I would like them to be. So again, I'm just going to take my scissors and just trim those down a little bit. I've brought my stenciled panel over and applied some regular tape runner to the back of the words. I'm just going to adhere those in the upper right hand corner. I've placed foam tape on my little bear, and I'm going to tape him down kind of close to the words. I've applied regular tape runner to the second branch and foam tape to that bee's nest, just so that we have a little extra added dimension. Now that I have my images laid out where I would like them, I'm going back to the black ink and I'm taking one of the tiny little bee stamps, and I'm just going to stamp him a few times around my scene. Because these are pigment inks, they do stay wet for a little while, so if you're not going to emboss them and you want to add some color or anything, I like to go ahead and kind of heat set them before I do any coloring on the bees. So I'm going to use my heat tool again on a low setting and just make sure that those bees are good and dry. Using GB3, I'm going to add a little bit of yellow to the body of my little bees. I wanted to add a little bit of shine to their wings, so I've got a Jelly Roll Star Writer in clear. And I'm just going to add just that little extra sparkle to their wings. Using tape runner, I'm going to place this panel in the center of my brown die stitched panel. Before I place my final panel, I wanted to add just a little bit of extra dimension on my card base. So I'm going back to that honey pot ink and my blending brush, and I'm going to add just a little bit of shading on the edge of that card base. It just adds a little bit more interest to it. So with that ink blending added around the edges of my card base, I'm going to center on my panel. And here is our finished card. I absolutely love how bright and bold these inks are, especially when you emboss them on white paper. The color really, really pops. I think that adding the extra embossing to the black is just a nice little touch with any coloring, and I absolutely love these ink pads with stencils. They work so perfectly for ink blending, and they are really, really great with stencils. So I hope you've enjoyed this card tutorial. If you did, please give it a thumbs up. Be sure to check out my channel and subscribe, and I hope that you have a very happy day. This is Heather. Bye.